Thank you very much for those that you are here attending this morning today, but I'm sure that there are a lot of people that they are waiting for us to start this fantastic conference on gender research assessment. That for me, they are two topics that they have to be discussed together, because in the academic life, we have to deal with academic issues and be evaluated, and sometimes when you are a woman, you have a different perspective. So that's why I'm so happy to have here today, as part of our project to Infomeri, which is a meta-research project that we are running with the University of Cyprus, the University of Maastricht, and we are all members of the Youth Alliance, so that's a very nice collegiality that we have established in this project and in others. And today we have Kyriaki Koura and Alexia Panayotou, that they are two super experts on gender. I have shared with you their CV. Alexia is the co-chair of the gender unit in the UNESCO, and Kyriaki is a postdoctoral researcher. That she's an associated researcher with the project in Infomeri, and they are doing a very interesting job and a very interesting research on how to deal with the gender issues on the research assessment. And I think that the title of the conference today is provocative and self-explaining enough, proposing to move from responsible to responsive, and I think is the challenge. Probably they will also discuss about the excellence and all these things that they are around evaluation, that they are not so likely to be the right way to evaluate. So I just leave the floor to them. I will be twittering, and if there is any question for the audience out there, I will just pick the microphone and pass you the question. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Because it will be easier for the recording.
Sure. Okay. I will do my best sitting down. I usually stand when I give lectures, but thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. It's such an honor and pleasure for both of us to be here, and especially to be here in Madrid. Such a beautiful city, and we're very blessed that it's also good weather. So thank you for the invitation. We really look forward to your questions and a discussion, if possible, on this, we think, very, very interesting and fascinating subject. So our talk today with Kyriaki, you can see the title, Gender and Research Assessment, and you also see the proposition that we want to bring to you and hopefully open for discussion, to move from what is called often responsible research to a term that we are proposing, more responsive research. But let's take this from the beginning. So I'm starting out and I'm sharing with you the title page of the annual report of my faculty, the Faculty of Economics and Management at the University of Cyprus. And you see here our aim to be great. Now I'm sharing this with you, and it's very likely that you have similar reports or you have seen similar reports in other universities, but our goal here is to kind of understand what all these matrices mean, all these numbers that you see here, the publications in highly regarded and leading journals, these graphs. What does it all mean? And more specifically, we are asking the question in our project, is this notion of greatness and excellence actually gendered? More specifically, we are posing the question of what happens when we rely on metrics, from journal lists and rankings to impact factors and citation indices that you just saw in my faculty's strategic plan, to define excellence, when their gendered construction remains not only relatively unexplored, but also problematically hidden. So that's our driving question in our project, and also here today. Now, just to frame our discussion a little bit, in our research, Kyriaki and I, we start from the premise that universities are gendered organizations. Like most organizations, if not all, on the planet in which gender and sexuality are often obscured through a gender-neutral and asexual discourse. So we very much assume that our policies, our processes, our procedures are neutral, objective, definitely asexual. But are they? That's our question. So in this sense, we use gender as a situated category of analysis that is instrumental in understanding differences, not just in our bodies, but also in organizational discourses and practices. We follow here the work of Silvia Gherardi and borrow this definition from her. So what do we mean by this gendered construction of excellence? Let's try to problematize it and deconstruct it a bit. Another way to ask this question is, does gender in research and academic assessment really matter? Of course, we would like to think that it doesn't. But let's look at what the research is telling us. And then tomorrow we're also doing a workshop here, thanks to Eva's invitation, the Open Science Lab. And one of the exercises we'd like to do is give out some CVs and try to think together. Does it make a difference if the CV has a female name, okay, as you see here, or a male name? Does it make a difference when in fact all of the credentials are exactly the same? Does it make a difference if the credentials are the same, but the way that we describe the credentials differs? Okay, this is for tomorrow. Before we do this, however, let's take a step back for a minute and ask another important question. Are women actually outsiders in universities? Now, I know you cannot read Greek, but we purposely left this in here. This is an invitation from our school. Does anyone read Greek? Okay, yeah, maybe some of our colleagues online can read Greek, and then if you can, then you're already laughing. For those of you who cannot, we're pretty sure you can still relate, because Greek is very much a gendered language, as is Spanish. So there is a masculine and a feminine. And I wanted to share this invitation with you because it's part of our daily lives, most likely yours. And this is an invitation to a carnival party a few years ago, but it's so telling of all the invitations we get. Now, the invitation is, as it is in Greek, to the male colleagues and the male PhD students. I'm sorry, I don't know Spanish to be able to translate it for you. What you see in the second circle there is that our male colleagues and our male PhD students are being invited to the carnival party with their with their husbands. Yeah? So for us, this is really interesting. And it wasn't to our gay colleagues. Yeah, the invitation wasn't for our gay colleagues. It's just that it's an indication that women are just invisible. Invisible, not just as faculty and students, even invisible as partners in this case. And then the last thing that you see there, the administrator who is sending the invitation on behalf of our dean, she's a woman. But again, the titles that we have are only in the masculine form. So although she's a woman, she is signing, because this is the way that our language is gendered, as, again, a male. So no women. We don't exist. Of course, we know that implicit bias affects all of us. This is a test. We're happy to share our slides for anyone who is interested. I share it with my students, just to try and understand in all the different ways that we have these blind spots in our language, but also, as we'll say in a minute, in our evaluations. And most of the time, we're just not aware. We don't We don't mean to exclude anyone. It's just that these biases are so hidden and so ingrained. And if I can just share this for a minute, it's a short clip that I think is so poignant and so telling.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Don't trust him.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's
She's
job.
clearly not educated.
Really? Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume? Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you, with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
So let's look at these blind spots, if you will, in our gendered construction of excellence. Because it seems that in every step of the evaluation process that we have in academia, there may be gender effects. In applying for an academic job, in the actual hiring, in going from a lecturer to assistant, in going from assistant professor to tenure, at least this is the way that it is in our university, but in any case, to a tenured position, and then going from tenure to professorship. Is it possible that in every one of these steps, we actually have blind spots? Now, again, if we can just take one step back, and I'll come back to the academic setting in a minute. Now, this is from the Harvard Business Review. It's a few years ago. It was a whole issue that was devoted to the so-called second generation gender bias. Now, first generation is perhaps what my mother went through, or the previous generation, and that was outright sexism. So when she was looking for a job, she was asked, are you married? When are you going to have children? And then oftentimes she would be rejected for a position. So it was more obvious, more blatant sexism. Now, research today shows that maybe, okay, that has been, it's no longer legal, not that it doesn't happen, but it's illegal to show sexist attitudes. What isn't illegal, however, is these blind spots, or another way of saying that is the second generation gender bias, where we make decisions, we say that they're objective, that they're neutral, but in reality, that is not the case. So what this volume of the Harvard Business Review indicated is that there's still very blatant biases that hold female leaders back, female academics also in the research in our field, perceptions about being emotional, bossy, or too nice. And actually, what I'm sharing with you here is one study that was done with, this was with organizations, it wasn't with universities, but it spoke about who we choose as leaders. And I think it very much holds for universities as well. So when these organizations were asked, what are the 16 most important competencies that you're looking for in regards to leadership? Well, you see here, they make sense. People who take initiative, they practice self-development, they want good results for others, they develop their teams, etc. And what you also see here is that, interestingly, when the researchers looked at the evaluations of men and women in these organizations in regards to these competencies, the red dots that you see here are the average female scores. Interesting, right? Now, if we were to hold indeed an objective evaluation, then it would make sense, based on these results, that there would be a lot more women than men in leadership positions. Well, we know that it's the exact opposite. So when the researchers went back to the decision makers and they said, well, listen, we have the average scores here, we have the end result, so what is going on? Well, oftentimes, I mean, no one is going to say, oh, I made a sexist decision, right? So oftentimes what the decision makers were saying is, well, you see the strategic perspective? It's the last one there. That's the one where male employees had a slight difference, slightly better scores. You see, yes, we have these 16 competencies, but actually the most important thing when it comes to a leadership position, well, we all agree it's strategic perspective, right? This is the second generation gender bias. No one is going to treat women or men in the same way that my mother's generation was being treated. We now assume that everything is being objective and gender neutral. Okay, so let's hold on to that perspective, and we'll try to bring it back to what happens in academia as well. Now, this is another really, really interesting study that shows how men and women are often evaluated. And what you see, hopefully there on the screen, is the words that are most often used to describe male colleagues, such as analytical, competent, dependable, confident, etc., etc., and the words that are most often used to describe women: compassionate, enthusiastic, energetic, organized. And you see that this is in descending order of relative frequency. So most often men are described as analytical and competent, most often women are described as compassionate. By the way, research from academic settings shows very similar results, that the nouns that are used to describe men and women differ, and they're very similar to what we see on the screen. So that's point number one. Point number two, look at the negative terms. Not only are they different, but women have a lot more negative terms in their evaluations than men. So what do we take away from this? One, why is it that we're using different words to describe men and women? I think that's really, really important, because this is performance reviews. This is what people's careers depend upon. Are these words, again, biased? Are they sexist? Sexist in both ways, right? Obviously, we want compassionate men. Compassion is a very key characteristic, especially in leadership positions, but we're not giving them that. Okay, and the flip side for women, which is more obvious. But also, why do we use more negative terms to describe women? Is it because we hold, again, these hidden expectations? Okay, now let's look at what's happening in academia as well. There's so much research that is coming out. We know, for example, that it takes women, on average, 15 years more than men to become professors. Eva and we were talking about our gender equality plan this morning in a separate meeting, and we're finding that in my university, we have very, very similar data. It takes women twice as long as men in my university to become professors. We need to understand why that is the case. Obviously, part of it is how many women we have. But even when we have departments where the number of female and male lecturers are the same, and we know this from North American data and European data as well. So a Department of Law, for example, or a Department of Education, or Department of Sociology, where the numbers are more equal at the lecturer position than in business or engineering, we see that as we go up the ranks, women somehow disappear. And then in regards to professors, we have the evidence that you see here. How is excellence defined? Our main topic. Well, in promotion decisions, we have research, we have a lot of studies that excellence becomes a kind of fleeting term. Go back to our HBR data. Who is excellent? Is it the people who are analytical? Is it the people who are compassionate? Well, actually, no. Yeah, the people who are analytical are much more likely to be defined as excellent in the performance reviews in academia than any other term. This morning in our meeting with Eva, again, we were discussing of what the criteria entails. Does excellence imply a certain type of research? Does it imply publications in certain type of journals on certain types of lists? Well, the answer is yes, but in a minute, we'll see how those lists, those journals, those subjects are also not gender neutral. What happens in regards to funding? Well, again, there's several gendered effects there. One is less women apply for funding outside research grants, and then we also have evidence that shows that even if a proposal is relatively egalitarian, men, especially senior male colleagues, are much more likely to receive that grant than women. More evidence here from UK Russell Group universities. You see the colleagues who are working on this. And then what happens in regards to citations? Interestingly, a male name is much more likely to be cited than a female name. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this, and some people are saying, well, maybe we need to include full names in the citations. And you may have seen several journals who are taking this route. The rationale behind that is we want to show that women are publishing, we want to show that women are doing exemplary work, and here it is. Yeah, so there is a rationale for that. The journal where I was associate editor, Gender, Work, and Organization, followed that perspective. Okay, I mean, there's different takes on this. I think there is value in that. Also, men, it seems, are much more likely to self-cite. Yeah? What is going on there? Well, it could be the so-called confidence gap. This is a term that you may have seen, and we can discuss it later as well. But if I am self-citing more, if I'm promoting my work more, and male colleagues tend to be better at promoting themselves and promoting their work, which results in self-citations, okay, I think we can all see what happens right after that in regards to numbers. Expectations of brilliance. Go back to our little film that we just saw. When we think of this term, a genius, or someone who's brilliant, or a high flyer, what is the image that comes to our head? Is it a woman? Well, research shows us that it's not. In fact, what is depressing for me is that when we do these studies with children and we ask them to draw someone that they think is a genius or someone who is really smart. I have a friend and colleague in social anthropology who runs these studies, and actually for me they're very depressing, because children of 7, 8 years old, they will draw a boy. They're not drawing brilliant girls. And these expectations and these biases, okay, they take us to later years as well. All right, so, okay, again and again, we see all these studies that are coming out of the gendered construction of excellence. Now, we know that gender differences seem to emerge early in academics' careers, and they have an impact on how often work is cited. Women are less likely to be published in high-impact journals, and even when they are, their research is less likely to be cited by others. I will share an example in a minute. We know that sadly there's reviewer and editorial bias. You see some of the recent studies coming out in regards to this. Less women are asked to review. There's funding bias. There's gender gaps in research funding, primarily attributed to evaluations of the applicant rather than the quality of the scientific projects. So this has to do whether or not we see that the principal researcher is qualified and whether they will successfully do this work. But this is an evaluation of the individual, more so than the merit of the project, as much as we don't want to think that that is the case. Matilda effect in science, we talk about this very often. Okay. So, all right. I will just continue. And of course, we know that it's not just academia. I had to put this slide in here just because I find it so interesting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this work from a very different field from ours. This is from art, but we know the research shows us that if the same painting is signed by a female artist versus a male artist, it will be seen as having, this is by experts, art evaluators, it will be seen as having 1/10 of the value as if the same exact painting is signed by a male artist. Okay. Let's look at some of the other biases that are at play here beyond the names, beyond the citations. And this is what I referred to earlier as the type of work that we're doing and also where this work is being published. I borrow these slides from a colleague, Matthias Nilsson, who presented in the equivalent conference that we had in September at the University of Cyprus, where we hosted Eva and Pablo as well. This is the work that Matthias is doing, and I found it so fascinating that I wanted to share with all of you here today. Now, what you see in this slide is whether it makes a difference what type of research one is doing, and whether this research is likely to be published in the so-called leading journals of business and management. What types of work gets published? Well, in the UT Dallas Journal list, you are much more likely to be published if you do work in dynamic capabilities, online markets, operations algorithms, multinational businesses, game theory, corporate governance. All right, no problem in that, right? Or is there a problem? Well, if we look at the gender composition of these fields, we find that male typical topics, which you see here denoted in blue, are much more likely to be published in these so-called leading journals than female typical topics such as healthcare management, CSR, HRM, etc. So we see a gendered effect there, although without this data, I think it would be very, very well hidden. We call these the knowledge hierarchies. So it seems that the subjects that are more male-dominated are much more likely to be published. Point number one. Point number two, much more likely to be published in the journals that we hold of high esteem. What does that mean? Okay, well, if in my excellence criteria I have that Kyriaki and Alexia need to publish in specific lists, specific journals for them to become professors, no one's going to say, oh, they're not being published because they're women, right? We're not being published because we chose not to do dynamic capabilities. And you see, this is a really interesting paper, happy to share at a later point. All right. So these knowledge hierarchies and the so-called epistemic imbalances are an integral part of what makes up the gendered system of inequality in the social sciences. And yet, we don't often pay attention to these. In fact, some research that is just coming out shows that even when we read certain abstracts, and in these abstracts are certain keywords, for example, the word strategic or the word analytical. Now, after I read this study, by the way, I'm fixing all my abstracts and all my keywords. Even if my paper's not strategic, I'm calling it strategic. Yep. These papers are much more likely to enter the review process and in the end be published because of these keywords in the abstract. I know that speaks very badly of our field and academia in general, but sadly this is what is coming out. By the way, the keywords that I often use, which are narrative and discourse analysis, I'm not using them anymore, even though that's what I do. Okay, thumbs down. Less likely to enter the review process, less likely to be published. So according to our Dutch colleagues, Van den Brick and Benschop, I don't know if any of you speak Dutch, I don't, but I love what they say here. This is a Dutch term, I understand, that in academia we are so far from meritocracy that the gender practices in the construction of academic excellence resemble, they say, a sheep with 5 legs. I don't know if you speak Dutch, I understand it's a Dutch phrase that basically says it's so elusive. There is no such thing as excellence. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kyriaki, who will discuss how the attempts that we're making to remedy some of these factors that I spoke about may actually not be enough.
Okay, as Alexia said, to address these problems that were discussed of traditional metrics, there are some key documents that encourage responsible research assessment practices. Some key interventions include the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA, of 2012, which is considered a catalyst for the responsible research assessment movement, and it can also be considered as the first organized attempt to challenge the use of the journal impact factor in assessing research quality. Then, building on DORA's momentum, we have the Leiden Manifesto, introduced in 2015, which introduced a more detailed and structured framework with 10 principles for the responsible use of metrics, followed by the Hong Kong Principles of 2019, which specifically focused on promoting research integrity in academic culture and evaluation. And also, we have the Metric Tide report in 2015, commissioned by the Higher Education Funding Council for England, out of concern for the over-reliance on metrics. The report was fortunately updated in 2022 with detailed case studies, practical examples, and a specific focus on research culture. Finally, the agreement on reforming research assessment by CoARA in 2022, which is our newest proposition. It builds on the foundational principles of previous initiatives, but it promotes a more qualitative peer-based assessment encompassing institutions, funders, and publishers. However, we notice that the responsible attempts that are currently made still leave gender behind. And specifically, we identify 3 key problems regarding this. First, how responsible research assessment is defined. Secondly, the scope. And thirdly, its content, and I'll discuss about that in turn. First of all, here we see 2 different interpretations of what responsible means. Do either of these definitions consider gender? And if so, to which extent? The first interpretation it seems it completely disregards gender, and instead it focuses on the principle of using quantitative metrics. The second one somewhat considers gender, focusing on supporting a diverse and inclusive research culture and academic evaluation. Then we notice that the guidelines implementing responsible research assessment have varying implementation scope. For instance, the Leiden Manifesto has a very narrow focus, aiming to guide the responsible use of responsible metrics, of quantitative metrics. DORA, on the other hand, is a much broader initiative, and it seeks to change how researchers and their outputs are being evaluated on a systemic level across funding agencies, academic institutions, journals, organizations that supply metrics, academic institutions, and individual researchers. Again, the key question is whether either of these approaches integrate gender into assessment practices. Now, the content of responsible initiatives. I will discuss 3 examples in turn. First of all, we turn to DORA, which, as discussed, is a set of recommendations developed with the goal of improving how researchers are being and their outputs are being assessed, and it has a very specific focus on avoiding to rely on metrics such as the journal impact factor. However, the declaration's text does not address the issue of gender bias. And not only that, its latest guidance, which was published very recently in 2024, only goes so far as to encourage the avoidance of biases as much as possible. So this is very problematic because, as Alexia discussed and as research shows, the use of metrics, it seems to impact women more. As it was mentioned, women are less likely to be published in high-impact journals, even when their research is less likely to be cited by others. And this then has an impact on their career trajectories, hirings, tenures, promotions, and this contributes to ongoing structural bias. Therefore, we ask, is this encouragement to avoid biases as much as possible enough to make the process less discriminatory? Is it possible, really, to mitigate gender bias without explicitly acknowledging the problem and proposing clear measures to address it at every step of the evaluation process? Our second example is the Leiden Manifesto. So, for the Leiden Manifesto, the introduction, it has a very strong criticism for the growing over-reliance on metrics as they can overshadow expert judgment. However, the remainder of the text does not align with the skepticism expressed in the introduction. Instead, it argues that metrics are usually well-intentional. Okay, they're not always well-informed and often applied, but they still have a role to play. Therefore, the main suggestion of the manifesto is that quantitative evaluation should support qualitative expert assessment. Again, this is problematic because, firstly, the manifesto not only fails to acknowledge gender bias that is inherent in research metrics, but also it does not address the gender bias that may pervade the peer review process. Our third example, the Hong Kong principles. So, the Hong Kong principles pride themselves on rewarding behaviors that foster research integrity and so on. However, they explicitly refrain in the text to address gender. And the rationale for this is very interesting, is that these issues concern social justice and but not research integrity. However, we disagree. First, we argue that eliminating gender bias is significant, is relevant to research integrity because by excluding diverse perspectives, it leads us to biased and incomplete findings. And interestingly, research has shown the affiliation between researchers' backgrounds and their research topics. So it then becomes questionable whether the research has employed the right questions and methods to elicit the relevant findings for society. Secondly, this approach overlooks how individual assessment can reinforce systemic gender bias. So assessment practices that focus only on individual achievements, they unfairly disadvantage women because they ignore their contributions to grouping performance with the outcome of perpetuating systemic inequalities. Now our proposition is so drawing in inspiration from Mair, we propose a shift from responsible research assessment to responsive research assessment. And for our purposes, this means that it is essential to integrate a thorough understanding and mitigation of gender biases at every stage of the evaluation process, because without such measures, evaluation will remain fundamentally discriminatory. Then we thought to propose some initiatives that are we consider promising because there are elements of what we define as responsive research assessment, and one of them includes the ongoing REF system reforms in the UK, which have committed to addressing gender bias in the upcoming REF exercises in 2029. So it hasn't happened yet, but they committed to doing this in the future. And the recent Harnessing the Metric Tide report, so the 2022 report, it warns that an over-reliance on quantitative metrics can marginalize women and foster a toxic culture. This connection was less evident in the 2015 Metric Tide report, which focused more on quantitative metrics, but it did not address their impact on gender and research culture. So to that end, compared to the REF exercise of 2021, they decided to expand the environment criterion from 15% to 25%, and this is done at the expense of the previously known output criterion, which has decreased by 10%. So it was 60 and it became 50. Then we have the initiative, we have another example at the University of Maryland's Department of Psychology, which has already implemented significant reforms to tenure and promotion criteria to embed gender equality and diversity in academic evaluation. For instance, the department completely abandoned the use of metrics due to their inherent biases that disadvantage women. It shifted from outcome to behavior-based evaluations, and it introduced awards to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, including research on underrepresented groups. To conclude, our work seeks to make two main contributions. Firstly, we want to make clear that we encourage new initiatives that seek to improve research assessment in order to acknowledge that excellence is a gender construct. This means that any attempts to measure it should explicitly address preconceived, supposedly objective notions that disadvantage women. With this premise, we're allowed to critically examine the extent to which existing guidelines perpetuate such assumptions and fail to acknowledge implicit gender biases, analyze who defines those objective standards of excellence, thus revealing the power structures, and thirdly, to assess their potential to fundamentally transform research assessment practices. Overall, concluding this presentation, we suggest that all aspects of the evaluation process should be responsive to the needs of society. And this means eradicating biases at every stage of the academic evaluation, starting at hirings for an academic job to policies for promotions and tenure. And we argue that this should not be done in addition to other metrics, but rather by critically evaluating whether they should be used and in which context and to what extent. Thank you so much, and we're welcome our questions.
We want your questions. We should say that we have about one more year into the project or so. Yeah, about one more year. So we know we still have work to do. We would be very grateful for any questions or comments that could help us in this way forward.
So thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. I have to say it didn't break a lot of breaking news to me because we're somewhat familiar with some of these things. In fact, I must recommend a book that I believe was written in the 80s by Emily Toth. Impeccable advice for women in academia. But it's kind of shocking that the information given 20 or 30 years ago perhaps continues to be the case. On the one hand, I'd love to ask you what sort of propositions, and I'm sorry that I missed the beginning, I was teaching, but maybe you did say something at the beginning that I'm not taking into account. What sort of propositions you have for institutions? More importantly, I'd love to know what percentage roughly of institutions are genuinely trying to make steps to change. And thirdly, I'd like to throw another factor into the bowl, into the game here, which is student evaluations. And I say this because it is my hunch, it is my personal assumption, that there are gender differences when students anonymously evaluate professors. I also know that in some institutions, these ridiculous surveys that are anonymous done by teenagers are actually taken into account to make decisions. Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'll start from your last question. You're right. We didn't include it here, but student evaluations are most definitely gender biased in similar ways to what we showed. So in how instructors or faculty are evaluated, but also in how they're used. So students have different expectations of male and female faculty. They expect female faculty to be more motherly, for lack of a better term. Yep. So it comes back to that HBR title page of being nice. You, as a female faculty, you are evaluated by teenagers to the extent that you are nice or compassionate, or if you have a lot of office hours, or if you hold their hand, or if you're lenient with their grades, etc., etc. And as a female faculty, you are negatively evaluated. It comes back to the title page. If you are bossy, if you're authoritative, if you don't pay enough attention to them, etc. So they have different expectations, and they evaluate male and female faculty differently, which we know is a problem. In anonymous evaluations, we also know that students are, they tend to be more aggressive with female faculty and more inappropriate. So female faculty are more likely to receive comments about their appearance, their clothes, and their attitudes. And sadly, it's very reminiscent. You mentioned an old book. I'll mention another one, Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, Men and Women of the Corporations, where 1977, where she says that women are more likely to be evaluated on their attitude rather than on how they get the work done. It seems to be the case with student evaluations, faculty evaluations in general as well. So that's one problem. The second problem is, you're absolutely right. Teaching evaluations are held in different regard for male and female faculty. So even though on evaluation, the standards, like in our case, it says it's 30%, 30%, 30%, okay, one-third, one-third, one-third research, one-third teaching, one-third so-called impact to society. It's not like that at all, by the way. It's like 100% research or so. But when it comes, how do student evaluations matter? Well, they don't matter, except if they are negative and they are for female faculty. And it's not just the case for our university. We know from research that is being done that this seems to be for European universities and North American universities as well. So a male faculty with bad teaching evaluations, okay, we toss it in the bin. No one cares if this person is a great researcher. But for female faculty, we stop. We're like, okay, why is she a bad teacher? Yeah, and we count that against the woman. So you're absolutely right as to how we treat these and what we need to do about them. Now, in regards to what we are proposing, I think that was your first question. there's so many different steps, I think, about what needs to be done. For us, that first step is exposure. So trying to convey the message that this notion of excellence and the processes we follow are very much gendered and not objective at all. And then maybe our next step is we are hopeful about these new initiatives that are coming out. We didn't speak about CoARA today. We hope to discuss it tomorrow because we have Eva, who is the expert here. We also didn't discuss the effects of open science because we have Eva, who is the expert. We're hoping to discuss it tomorrow. But we're hopeful for these initiatives that are coming out and trying to change the evaluation process to move away from the tyranny of metrics. It's a great book that I love, but so I'll borrow the term. To move away from this tyranny of metrics that is very gendered to different types of evaluations. But of course, that doesn't address what do we do about getting more women into academia. That's a whole other separate topic. How we encourage more women who do have PhDs to enter academia, which is very masculinist and male-dominated, rather than go to the industry or follow different careers. We didn't discuss that, but
And if I may add something about the potential that we see in CoARA, in specifically, what we like, and it's that it's a living document. We consider this very important because we already see that there are examples there that seek to address these issues, and it's important to have a document that is willing to change based on changing circumstances and needs. So we will discuss this tomorrow in more detail, but I think that this is one of the elements that I wanted to emphasize in addition to everything Alexia just said.
do you have any suggestions for us, or how you see the way forward?
I have a point
sorry.
when you mentioned, because always we are asked what is the difference between CoARA and DORA, and I just got your point because it's a key issue that I didn't was so conscious until I hear from you that, because you just have a big framework of research evaluation and you don't go through the gender, but also I'm thinking that it would be a very good idea that if we think CoARA, when we have another open call for working groups, having a working group that is focused on gender and EDI issues, because we have this discussion about if they should be together. EDI is close to open science from the UNESCO perspective, but the point is that EDI should be misleading the concept of gender. That is still something that we have to underline based on citations, on the likelihood to be published, the likelihood, not only the likelihood to get positively evaluated, but the likelihood that you dare as a woman to do it. You know that sometimes I was discussing with a head of ANECA that it's not a problem the women that they apply and they get it. The figures that we have always they are positive. The figures that we need to know is that the ones that they don't apply.
Yes.
So this is what I said to you.
Yes.
When I applied for my sabbatical fellowship, I didn't get the change of the dates, and I say, I'm doing this argument not for me or not for the people that they get the thing. The ones that they say, I'm not applying for a sabbatical because I have a 10-year-old. That's it, full stop. It's not for me. So that I think this is the real likelihood to just go through it is not excellence, it's being responsive, no, responsible. Yeah. And I think there is a lot of things to do with this concept of RRI that until I listened to you, I was so happy about, that responsible research and innovation. And then I say probably responsible is like playing the piano, like excellence. You put the word and that's it, full stop. This is excellence. This is an excellent university. Welcome to our excellent university. This is responsible evaluation. Welcome to our responsible evaluation mechanism. That's it, full stop. But what does it mean? I think it's a step forward. I really want to work with you in this. Yes. Thank you. I don't know if there are so many other questions or... No? Okay, thank you very much for being here. And I haven't been tweeting to CoARA and to people that they are involved in this, but I didn't get any more than some comments and some references on another RASPOS, which is a project that is funded by the European Commission that is related with the open research evaluation infrastructures. And I'm very happy that they are just pointing out this topic on gender on the open infrastructures. But that's it. That's all what we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. Did you have any, I'm wondering if, did you have any comments for us?
I wish I had. I mean, I could give you plenty of examples of what I believe are issues of mansplaining and toxic.
Oh, yeah.
The one question that I suppose lines with what you were just saying now is, what is the dropout rate?
It's okay. It's okay. It's for us.
What might be the dropout rate? In the same way that some people may say, okay, well, I'm staying at this level because trying to get even higher is just going to mean there's so many obstacles in my way that I'm just not going to bother. And I completely understand, and I don't even have children, so I see where this is going. Obviously mixed in with a context of precarity that is quite insulting. But I wonder what the dropout rate is also for people once they're in the profession, and they're maybe getting less excited over time because they see that they're butting their head against the wall, and it's like, well, okay, I'm thinking, that there's other options in life that probably pay the same for less qualified jobs, and so I don't know if there's any data on that.
About the dropout rates, you mean?
For example, I mean, I think her question was super interesting, but we'll never probably know answers to. I mean, you could do a really intense piece of research and find that out, but certainly we would be able to somehow map dropout rates for people once they're in the academic field.
Yeah, we do have it actually. We do know, like if you take, I don't have it in front of me, but we know from the number of PhD students, for example, how many men and women will choose an academic career, and we see that, I mean, it's what you expect. More men choose an academic career. And then in regards to the dropout rate as you go up the hierarchy, it's always the women who are dropping out for various reasons, including toxic culture. We don't discuss it here because then we open it up, but your point about toxic culture, maybe it's this, right? It's everything, the toxic culture in universities, and within that is the evaluation process and who's dropping out. And do you want to say anything? Actually, I just remembered you asked for a percentage, and I forgot your question. You had asked
earlier
about.
On. No, I was wondering what percentage of institutions are actually acknowledging and taking steps that is a little bit more than just saying, hey, I'm green, and I'm greenwashing, by the way.
I think that's a great question, because the answer would be in Europe 100%, right? Because we now have the JEP, right? The Gender Equality Plan that we need to present to the EU if we want to get funding. So 100% of universities in Europe are taking gender into account. The real question is it gender washing? And the answer is, well, probably 100% of universities is gender washing. But can we have the real data? I honestly don't know how, because we're in this exercise now of ticking boxes, right? What is the effect? Is there an effect on mansplaining in our faculty meetings? None whatsoever. Do we have colleagues that when I'm not being recorded now, right? I'm going to lose my job after this. No, it's like But when we're discussing the evaluation committees and we're asking people to join from overseas, do I have colleagues who make sexist comments and say things like, "Oh no, I don't like her picture. Let's not invite her"? Do we have this? Of course we do. Do we have a JEP? Of course we do.
To what extent do you think that this toxic culture is in the university more exacerbated than in the rest of the society? Is it something specific to the university, or is it really an example of every other?
I don't think that it's yeah, I think it's a bigger problem. I think we study the academic world right now, but we see it everywhere, this issue of this toxic culture, and very recently I think the European Commission has implemented the 33% for women, that it's mandatory for 33% of women to be included in higher positions, leadership positions, and that was those included in organizations that are not universities, it's corporate positions. So I'm assuming it's not a.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I think it's a part of a bigger phenomenon, of course. What worries me about universities, and this is my own disillusionment, is that I feel in many ways we should know better. Yeah. So I joined academia, I think, with a very idealistic perspective of I'm among people who love to learn and make the world a better place, and obviously we're highly educated, and so I was really disillusioned because of my expectations, but also because in some ways the idiosyncrasies of universities make universities we're very hierarchical, the way that our evaluations are happening, and because we have this aura of being objective and excellent, I worry that we are not under as much scrutiny as corporations, for example, because corporations can make money out of being diverse, yeah, and they have diversity officers, and is it gender washing? Diversity washing, yeah. But in some ways, because there's this other layer of, oh, we need to care about these things because it brings us money, I worry that universities, we hide everything under the carpet in a better way, yeah.
Well, I mean, it was a comment since I started like in my PhD as a PhD candidate, and after like presenting my PhD. So I think that we share like the same perspective. I had like this image of like the university as this oasis in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
So full of knowledge, like full of like fair people.
Yeah.
Full of like fair comments.
Yes.
Yeah. What should be
Yes.
university? What should be university, but in the end, university is just like a mirror, and you can see. I mean, it's a mirror of what you can see in the streets.
Yes.
It's human behavior. So this is not. It's not about like to make idealistic comments about what university should be, because university is full of like people that is like in the streets. So it's just like a reflection. We are a mirror.
Should we be a model? We should do better.
We should.
I think we should do better.
Yes.
Precisely because we're having conversations like this one, so we should know better. Yeah.
Just based on evidence. So we are prepared to quantify evidence.
Yes.
And this is what the society wants, by the figures of saying what everybody's seeing, and just having the right acknowledgement of the issue. So we should do better.
Even, I mean, today you cannot, I mean, when you hear like, oh, he or she is like full professor, sadly today it doesn't mean anything, because there is a lot of people that arrive to this position with a lot of like unfair
Yes.
attitudes.
Yes.
So
There's another big box that we are not going to open. If we want to go for the research integrity,
Yes.
ethics, and the rector of the Salamanca University, and on and on and on. So that's a big thing, but it's part of the system. So that's why we should change the system, because it's not going to bear with more. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.